Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine brought to you by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy across the Commonwealth of Virginia. My name is Joe Thomas, and you can visit us online at tertiumquids.org. We begin this week with a special look inside Bernie Sanders. Well, the economic advice of Bernie Sanders with Michael Strain from the American Enterprise Institute, author of a great piece, Bernie Sanders is Wrong About Workers on Welfare. Michael, thanks for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Thank you for writing this wonderful piece. We've shared it on our social media as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, and thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
It never ceases to amaze me that Bernie Sanders finds new and creative ways to say, or maybe he just was misread the Robin Hood story as a kid. I don't know. But this idea that employers are the problem with poverty and that taxing them more will help people out of poverty. Somehow, do you think he's just doing it for the political points, or do you really think this is what he believes will happen?
Oh no, I have no reason to doubt his sincerity, and there is a certain intuitive appeal to the argument he's making. He's singling out companies that are owned by individuals and families that are extremely wealthy, and he's making the argument, hey, Jeff Bezos is worth $150 billion or whatever it is today. And yet some of his workers qualify for government safety net benefits like food stamps or Medicaid. What gives? Why can't Bezos pay him a little more money, especially given how wealthy Amazon has made Bezos? Mm-hmm. The problem is that Senator Sanders, fundamentally misunderstands the economics at play in terms of how those workers' wages get determined. And he fundamentally misunderstands who in society is responsible for making sure that workers who work hard and play by the rules don't end up living in poverty. And so he comes up with a solution that's actually counterproductive, and he ends up blaming businesses who, if anything, are reducing the number of people who are on safety net programs, not increasing that number.
Well, and doesn't the amount of money somebody earns, whether it be for a product that they sell or, in this case, the service they provide an employer, isn't that really based on the uniqueness of that product or skill? And if you're doing something that's not that unique, you're not going to gain as much money. But there are many things that go into that uniqueness, including your attitude, your industriousness, your availability, your manageability, those things that go into taking one person off of a line at an Amazon and having them make more than somebody who works at the same line. It's one of the things that cripples unions sometimes, is that the more industrious workers wind up getting the same salary as somebody who doesn't work nearly as hard. It's what crippled socialism as well. And to that end, Jeff Bezos makes a lot of money because not everyone on the line at Amazon can run the company the way he does.
Yeah, or can create and found it, which
right.
is, in the case of Mr. Bezos, what he did as well. I think that's a good way to look at it and a good way to summarize it. I mean, I think the fundamental reality is that workers are paid based on their productivity. Now, it's hard to measure workers' productivity. That can be measured with error, and there are certainly other factors that go into determining a worker's wage. But if you want to kind of sum it up in one sentence, what's the most important factor that determines how much a worker gets paid? It's how much value the worker's work is adding to the firm. And at the end of the day, if you've got a worker who is able to generate, $10 an hour in revenue every hour he works for his firm, if that worker didn't work at the firm would make $10 an hour less in revenue than if the firm employed that worker. It is just unrealistic to expect that worker is going to make $15 or $17 or $19 an hour month after month after month after month. The company is losing money every hour it employs that worker.
Mm-hmm.
And we may wish that that worker earned more money, but in a market economy, it's just unrealistic to expect that businesses are going to do that, and it's not their responsibility to lose money in that fashion in order to make sure that that worker has an adequate standard of living. It's everybody's responsibility in society. That's why we have these safety net programs, because it's not just the employer of that low-wage worker who's responsible for making sure that that worker's material needs are met. It's everybody in society's responsibility, and that's why safety net and why we shouldn't expect a business to be the main provider of a safety net.
Michael, is it also fair to point out that the more government gets involved with these companies, and we've gone through this with Amazon to a degree, but certainly you see it on Facebook, you see it in a lot of industries where the biggest dogs in the marketplace cry for government oversight, and you think, well, that doesn't make any sense until you realize they're just hoping to keep competition down. It's that competition that not only drives down costs for consumers, but drives up wages. If more people did what Amazon did, if more companies served the economy the way Amazon did, the cost for each company would be lower, and each employee would therefore be twice as valuable because there'd be two companies bidding for their services.
Yes. I mean, the basic point that a dynamic and growing economy over the long run is to the benefit of workers is absolutely correct. We care about wages. We also care about the purchasing power of wages. And companies like Amazon and like Walmart drive down consumer prices, and that makes a worker's wage go further. So having those low prices not only benefits middle class households, but it also benefits the workers who we're concerned about. The trick is helping to make low-wage workers more productive, helping to make low-wage workers more skilled, helping to make low-wage workers more valuable to their employers. And that's really where public policy should be focused, not on penalizing the companies that are hiring low-wage workers.
Well, and also it's that career ladder that sometimes somebody is at an entry level, and that's where generally the lowest wages are, and sometimes those are the youngest people with the fewest responsibilities at that starting point in life. What we watched, I think, through the middle of the 2000s was even in chain restaurants, places where it was usually the purview of either retirees or teenagers, you were watching 35 and 40-year-olds taking drive-through jobs at fast food restaurants because that's where the work was, and that's also part and parcel of a vibrant and growing economy, isn't it, Michael?
Oh, sure, absolutely. We need an employment ladder, and if you want people to climb an employment ladder and to go from job to job and get a pay raise with each step of advancement, and to have more responsibility and to be able to make greater contributions, people have to be able to get their foot on the first rung of that ladder. And one of the unfortunate effects of a lot of policies like what Senator Sanders is proposing is that it makes it harder and harder and harder for a lot of people to get their foot on the first rung of that ladder. And if you don't get your foot on the first rung, you're not going to get to the second rung, to the third rung, to the fourth rung.
You mentioned strange bedfellows in the column you wrote for Bloomberg on this, Michael, in which you bring up one of the great defenders of Bernie Sanders' position is Fox commentator Tucker Carlson, who is often considered one of the reasonable conservatives on network television. What is behind his support of Bernie Sanders, or is it just in the rhetorical that poor people, you should have a way to not be so poor?
It's a good question, and I was certainly surprised to see Tucker Carlson motivations here is that Senator Sanders is mostly concerned about income inequality. He looks at how much money the Walton family has.
Well, is it
workers?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you dropped out there. We must have lost the phone connection for a second, Michael. So you mentioned the amount of money the Walton family has, and then we lost connection. Go back to that.
Should I just repeat it?
Yeah, go ahead.
My reading of the motivation here is from Senator Sanders that he's mostly concerned about income inequality. That he looks at how much money Jeff Bezos is worth, and he can employees make. That he looks at how much money the Walton family is worth, and he compares that to the wages of some Walmart employees, and that it's that gap between the owners and the workers that is motivating Senator Sanders. Tucker Carlson seems to be motivated by this growing sense on the populist right that big corporations are suspect. And that if you look at an Amazon or you look at a Walmart, their success is not the product of a free market, that their success is instead the product of being a big, powerful corporation that can control regulation and that can squash competitors, and that therefore big, powerful corporations should be suspect. This is a view that pops up throughout American history when populism is on the rise, and it seems to be reflected in Mr. Carlson's views and comments on this issue.
Well, and people forget that Amazon helps lots of small companies get their products out to business to customers as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
absolutely.
To vilify anyone who's doing anything now, I am all for saying to an Amazon, hold on a second here, if you're trying to help us craft regulation that keeps some junior Amazon from starting up and doing what you did in a different way, maybe and finding a different marketplace, I would be wholeheartedly against that. But that's not the same as just saying, yeah, you're rich and your employees don't share in that wealth.
Oh, I completely agree. Our regulation in terms of antitrust and pro-competition should be designed to make consumers as well off as possible. It should look at exactly the kinds of things that you just outlined. If Amazon is engaging in anti-competitive behavior, then that is grounds for regulation. But just because Amazon is a big, successful company does not mean that it is thwarting competition. In fact, it could be increasing competition. And it was not that long ago that people looked at Amazon specifically and companies like Amazon as the kind of crown jewels of the American economy, as real innovators, as real success stories. And that is still my view, and I think that's still the correct view. We should be celebrating Amazon. We certainly shouldn't be trying to tax it punitively or regulate it out of existence.
Well, let me ask you this, Michael, and in that vein, you mentioned that they're pointing at a Walton family or a Bezos, and it's been my experience, and we actually did this on I think it was on my 55th birthday. We went back to the year of my birth, and I read the top 10 richest Americans, the list. I think it was in Forbes, and then Bloomberg, the most recent year, had a list of the richest Americans, completely different list. So this idea that wealth is static is crazy as well. Yeah,
that's right, and you could even see that among some of the uber rich families in American history. If you look at those sorts of lists today, you don't see a lot of Carnegies on there. You don't see a lot of Vanderbilts on there. You don't really even see a lot of Rockefellers on there. We know that there's a lot of movement in and out of that, top 1% every year. And that, to me, is another sign a strong American economy and of a manifestation of American values.
Well, and it is what makes America great, is that you could be poor one year and rich the next, and vice versa. I mean, you're only one generation. What's the expression? The idiot sons of the idiot sons will be the end of every company in America.
That's right.
So this idea that Bernie's, and I guess it's just because Bernie is stinging, to me anyway. I read your piece, and I think Bernie is stinging a little bit from the rebuke that even some of the left-wing publications had over his idea of Medicaid for all. And they started to pencil out the numbers and saw that it would cost more money than exists on the planet to do all the things that Bernie said he wanted to do. I guess that's where he turns around and says, well, I'm going to go find it somewhere else then. And is that a little bit of this? Is Bernie's own little populism coming to the fore?
Well, I certainly think that Senator Sanders is motivated by concern about lower wage workers and by concern about income inequality. It's funny that you mentioned the Medicare for All plan, because it really is inconsistent with what Senator Sanders is proposing in terms of the tax on employers of low wage workers. The logic behind the tax is if you get $10,000 a year in Medicaid benefits, and you're working for Amazon or you're working for Walmart or you're working for McDonald's, then Bernie Sanders thinks that those companies aren't paying you enough and they should write a check to the federal government to reimburse the taxpayer for your Medicaid. At the same time, he wants Medicare for all. He wants universal health care. And so, should we think of his Medicare for all plan as a multi-trillion-dollar subsidy from the taxpayers to big business? I don't think he'd want us to think of it that way. And if I were him, I'd be thinking about how to reconcile those views. I think that they're pretty hard to reconcile.
Is there a danger, and Michael, this is the part that I always want to bring back to the conservative-minded, whether they are someday going to hold public policy positions. We have big elections in 2019 where ostensibly the entire General Assembly in Virginia could change hands. And those who believe in conservative free market principles have to understand that poverty is also real. And if we don't address them, I've used the phrase present company excluded, think tank conservatives who don't understand that where Bernie Sanders lives are on streets where there is abject poverty, and the conservative has to understand that that addressing that has to be a little bit more the way Donald Trump did than the way we had been doing it perhaps through the Obama administration, with some more real world tangibility and even some tangible results that people can see. Otherwise, Bernie Sanders is going to win the day just on the rhetoric of socialism, which we watched in France and then in Russia and through China. Can be very compelling.
Oh gosh, I think there's no question, but the conservatives need to take poverty seriously and need to place anti-poverty programs and place fighting poverty at the very top of their agenda. Unfortunately, I don't see President Trump really doing a whole lot on that front, and I hope that changes as his administration continues to unfold. We're still in the first half of the first term. But I completely agree with you on the importance of that. And I think, Senator Sanders just has it completely backwards. Amazon, McDonald's, Walmart, these companies are helping to fight poverty by offering employment to lower wage workers. Mm-hmm. If those sorts of jobs weren't available, the unfortunate reality is that those workers would not be, partners in law firms or heart surgeons.
Exactly.
They're a lot of workers in those jobs have relatively less education than a lot of other workers. A lot of workers in those jobs have relatively fewer skills than the average American worker and have less experience in the labor market than a typical American worker, and that's why they're working $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 an hour jobs, and why they're not earning middle class wages. And we should be thinking of Amazon and McDonald's and Walmart as being a partner in fighting poverty, not as being a source or a cause of poverty.
Absolutely.
And that's where the senator just has it completely backwards.
Well, and your point is well taken. Is and even while you're working that $12 an hour job, maybe you're working towards something more. Maybe you're going to school. Maybe you're taking classes. You're doing a program through your community college, whatever it may be. Wherever you are, that low wage job is and should be, as we talked earlier, that ladder to the next level. And if they disappear, then there's no ladder at all. Michael, I really appreciate your visit, and thank you for the column again, shared via our social media, Bloomberg.com, American Enterprise Institute, and Director of Economic Policy Studies there, Michael Strain. Thank you so much, sir, and you have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for having me on.
Diamond and Silk. We just saw you guys in Richmond a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. No, it's our honor to have you on the show a little bit. Now, you ended your show in Richmond. Somebody brought up Charlottesville in one of the Q&As. You do a Q&A in the show.
Uh-huh.
And you said, don't even get me started on Charlottesville. We'll need another hour in the room. So here you go. You got it.
Well, you know what? When we saw the hypocrisy that happened down there in Charlottesville with people on the left, with these groups that I think that they should be deemed terrorist organizations Antifa, going into Charlottesville, being bussed down there to reap havoc on other people. Now, let me just make sure I make myself clear. You know, the Democrats, they were the party of the KKK.
That's right.
They understand how all of this chaos works.
Yes.
And we're not for no KKK, but we're also not for no Antifa and all of these other organizations thinking they can go down there and wreak havoc on other people's lives.
That's right.
If you have a permit to do something, that's your right. The courts allowed you that right. And nobody should interfere in that right. So I think that it was some blame to go around on both sides.
Sure.
And when the president spoke out about it, you see how they tried to corner him in.
Yes.
And all he was bringing to light was, hold up. Maybe this side was wrong, but this here side, you had other sides, like the Antifa and the Black Lives Matter, that made it their business to bust themselves in there. Because I heard a lot of those people wasn't even from Charlottesville.
Oh, yeah,
And that was the most sickest, saddest. It was a sick day in America.
But what makes one group the arbitrator of truth?
Right.
Okay.
Or to get to think that they can shut down free speech.
Free speech. That's right.
But that's the thing. If you allow people to speak, then you can kind of look at both sets of words and say, all right, which one do we agree with? Because sometimes truth is where you're standing. But you have to hear. So if David Duke is out there talking KKK stuff, you're going to hear it and go,
we're not going to want to be around that.
But if it's not my truth, because everybody is entitled to their own truth. If it's not my truth, I'm going to go away or not even show up.
And my thing is, what if we would have let this all die from the lack of attention?
That's
Meaning,
right.
if somebody was out there protesting the statue or just act like we didn't see it, that will go away.
That's
but because you bring attention, not only attention, but national attention to this issue, now you have the whole world looking at this, and it's all blown out of proportion.
And
that's what I don't like.
Every person I meet, and they say, oh, you're from Charlottesville, and they get that kind of 10-mile stare, like they feel like they want to give me a hug or something. It's like, I love this town. This is the town where Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence from. Madison also lived in just outside of Charlottesville. So this is the town that gave the world the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So it can't be a more important town. And that's why I kind of feel like they targeted Charlottesville, because if they can pull those documents out, well, then they can rewrite whatever they want. They can make their own story.
Well, they don't need to rewrite nothing. Just like I tell them, don't rewrite the Constitution, reread it. But reread is what you need to do.
That's right.
But when you look at all of this here, you just be taken aback by it all. How people can create chaos. The left-wing media taking a spread and they spin a narrative, and then it paints Republicans as if we're racist.
Right.
It paints white people as if they're racist. And that's not the case.
But see, that's been the narrative that they want to do. They want to keep people stuck in the pains of their ancestors.
Right.
We've never been slaves. We've never picked cotton a day in our life. And so why do you want to keep me stuck in the past? Because you don't want me to project out to the future.
Right.
When I saw that these individuals had a permit to be there, I don't care there if they were spewing hate, if they were spewing love. They had a permit to be there to spew it.
Right.
But
And
the other people did
allowed
not have a permit to even be there. Imagine if they would have stayed on the bus and went somewhere else. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, all of these other different groups. If they didn't have a permit, they should not have been there.
They want us doing this.
They
want us
want to
butting heads
divide
with each
us
other.
based on our race. That, like you said, they want to put us against each other,
Right?
So that they can deflect. So that
And
we
distract.
not distract.
Yeah.
We're bickering against each other, and like you said, they're putting more money in their pocket.
That's
they're
right.
doing more damnable things. They're trying to steal more elections and do all that kind of good stuff.
I call Al Sharpton the original race profiteer.
Oh, he's the race baiter.
Maybe it goes back to some of the guys like Jesse Jackson also certainly made some
Yes.
good bank
David
off of it
Gates.
as well. And I feel like people say, "Oh, I'm poor," and I get it. I don't want somebody to be poor. I am poor quite a few times. When my wife says, "Don't you buy coffee
you're
in the store?"
temporary out of cash. You're never.
right.
You're temporary out of cash. Go ahead.
But I don't. And 25% of the population of Charlottesville can't find a job in Charlottesville that pays better than $30,000 a year. That's got to be fixed. And meanwhile, the city will sit there and talk about rules that keep people from building offices or factories or places where people could work. And it's almost as if they create the problem so that they can profit from the problem.
Right. Yes, exactly. And if you look at what's going on, even with our government, that's what they do. They talk about, okay, we're going to solve this illegal immigration problem. They're never going to solve it because somebody is pocketing off of illegal immigration, illegal aliens coming into our country. They're profiting off of this here. So they say one thing, but they do a whole nother totally
Absolutely.
different thing.
That's right.
Amen. And the thing is, that's why you can't get Republicans and Democrats. It's the one thing they can agree on. They don't want to pass immigration
They
reform.
don't want to. They bipartisan on that particular issue.
it is that, how do we fix it, though? See, I have a good friend. He's actually the president of Black Lives Matter New York chapter, but he's spoken at pro-Trump rallies. He says, we need jobs in my community, not hate. They don't want division. Maybe not every Black Lives Matter unit is like that. He leads his in his way. And maybe I had a small part in it because I talked to him about growing up in New York in the 70s, and his neighborhood in the Bronx was a dump then, and it's still a dump, and nobody's done anything about it. They keep getting elected to do stuff about it. How do we fix this? Because I feel like I said on September 13th when I went on the air the day after the riots, I said the only way we save ourselves from this is to get to know each other.
That's right.
To say hello to people on your block or in the coffee shop or at the gas station.
Even if you disagree with them and their politics or their political ideology. Right. Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're going to have to agree to disagree in order to get along, and people are going to have to learn how to do that. Listen, I'm not for organizations that's reaping havoc on Americans. I'm not for that.
Right.
But what I am for is Americans coming together, and don't let them divide us based on the color
exactly
of our
what's
skin.
happening.
Don't let them put us against each other.
That's right.
You're absolutely right.
And another thing, we have to start looking past the skin color. How do we fix this? Look past the skin color and recognize that you are an American first.
That's right.
Yeah.
Stop
Absolutely.
allowing them to divide us based off of our skin color.
Right.
Okay, because they know that if they can keep you in your little black box, then it's easier for them to control you if
That's
they can
right.
keep us all separated.
Right.
Because it's united.
We stand.
That's how you build a foundation.
Well, and God bless Twitter and YouTube and Facebook for throttling back your feeds, because if not for that, I don't know if half the world would have heard your act, your routine, your thoughts, and your beautiful commentary, because I feel like we talk to an echo chamber too often, and it's not about I want to keep my stuff. I don't want you to touch my stuff or anything like that. I want people to have jobs. I want people to be able to raise their families. I'd love everyone to have one job so that the wife or husband can stay home and raise kids, because I always feel like our kids are the ones that are suffering in all this.
Yeah.
And I know they're signaling you, and you got a full dance card.
No, what I was going to say is that what the devil meant for evil, God turned it around for our good.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well,
Amen.
one door closed, a big old window gonna open, and no man can shut it, not even Mark Zuckerberg.
That's right. Yeah.
Diamond is, go ahead. I was going to say that we're being featured in a movie called Dummycrats.
Oh, okay. When does that come out?
It's coming out premiering October the 15th. And we're telling everybody to go to Dummycratsthemovie.com. That's Dummycratsthemovie.com.
Okay.
Put in your email address so that you can stay updated and informed. While President Donald J. Trump is draining the swamp, Diamond and Silk is exposing. We are exposing the swamp.
That's right.
Well, you see them.
Yeah, these leaders that's been in office all of these years and have been working for their own greed and not the need of people.
That's right.
The ones that has never pushed any piece of legislation to help Americans, yet they're getting their kickback patty whacks, give a dog a bone.
That's right.
Well, I like that
That's
one.
right.
Save that one. But let me ask you this. You see this, the Washington Post is out there trying to sell Bob Woodward's book.
Yeah.
About
the salacious gossip.
And I look at all the people who he's talked to, the insiders, and they're all swamp creatures like, Reince Priebus.
Deep state snakes.
That's
who they are.
That's who they are.
Wait, but when he hired him, I was like, here's a guy who's trying to build a bridge, bring in the people who disagreed with him, and he didn't understand that that's just not how it works in Washington.
No, listen to me. These people gravy trains are coming to an end.
That's right.
And they don't like it. The president is really draining the swamp. So they will do anything they can to disparage him and demean him in any type of way, even if it takes a book that has nothing but salacious gossip in it, because we don't know if that foolishness is true.
Right. And what's the name of that book? Fear?
Yeah, Fear. Yeah,
false expectations appearing real. It's false, baby. It's all fake.
So really, we're going to have to stop letting that be a distraction. They do that because he's winning. They don't stop losers, but they will stop a winner.
That's right.
They smear him because they fear him. That's what's happening.
Amen. Well, I hope this just keeps falling into this Stormy Daniels, Cohen. It's every week it's a different thing. Ladies, thank you so much. When Dummycrats come out, is it going to theaters or is it going to be
in theaters nationwide?
So if we go to Dummycrats.com, we can pitch for it.
Dummycratsthemovie.com.
Dummycratsthemovie.com.
We finally got Dinesh D'Souza's
Yes,
movie in Charlottesville, Death of a Nation. So I want to see yours there, and you can stay at our house and come in, and we'll have you there for the grand opening of it.
Tea.
And hibiscus tea. She puts the high in hibiscus. So
right.
I love it.
Diamond and Silk, thank you so much for coming to Fair this year, for stopping by the radio station and talking to Charlottesville a little bit. We've got to get you down there for a city council meeting or something.
Yes.
Please, I'll bring you, I'll introduce you, I'll cede my time to you, and you can go at it.
Yes, we'll keep them straight. Yes.
Thank you so much.
God bless you. Have a great morning.
Thank
God
you.
bless you. Thank you.
Joe Thomas, Federation for American Immigration Reform, feet to the fire. One of these days, we're not going to need to do this anymore. That's what I say every time I put a nonprofit on the air. I said, you got to be working towards not having to be needed anymore. One of the rock stars of the effort is Dave Brat. And Congressman, thank you for having us and visiting with us and talking about this. We visited with Bob Goodlatte earlier, and his frustrations sometimes, he's way too polite of a Virginian to talk about frustrations in getting his Goodlatte bill passed.
Right.
But former head of ICE saying it's the best piece of legislation he's ever seen. What do we have to do to get that passed before too long?
Right. It looks like we got a small subset of that coming up with an E-Verify ag package, but that's a small sliver. And we do need the whole piece, and I fought for that like crazy. And basically only came up 20 votes short. And so that's a problem. Now the president's going to push for the wall in the last budget piece. But it's just been a perennial problem. Even the Democrats were for it just a few years back. Hillary, Bill was for it. Obama was for E-Verify and a lot of the components. But now the left has just gone way off course, right? So it's not your grandfather's Democrat Party anymore. The left has departed. They want to arrest the ICE agents now, the law enforcement agents who protect us every day, put their lives on the line. We have 200 million lethal doses of fentanyl coming across the border, on top of heroin, and then the trafficking problem goes along with that.
Well, even human trafficking. You talk about E-Verify.
Yeah,
I mean, I've talked to the head of the Border Patrol who said easily 70% of the traffic across the Mexican border is human trafficking. Is people who don't even realize they're breaking the law. They're just told, come with us, we got a job to do, and they get deposited somewhere and then they're abandoned.
Yeah, and I'm working on that issue. I have Ann Wagner from Missouri very powerful person up here on the Hill, put the bill in on trafficking. She's coming to my district Wednesday, so folks can come to that panel. We'll be publicizing that. And we've been working with our sheriffs, in Chesterfield and Henrico and throughout all of the up in Culpeper, Orange, Louisa as well. And my opponent on the Democrat side, she's endorsed by Senator Elizabeth Warren, and she's opposed to basically any of the strong moves we need. They're basically open borders, folks. She's for sanctuary cities, we know for sure, and that's a pretty good indicator.
Well, why do you want to be a lawmaker if you don't want people to enforce the laws? That's what's always puzzled me, is these are folks who are elected to office to write laws. If you find a law you don't like, you have in the past tried to work towards passing a change to it. These folks have just decided, you know what, either we'll get a judge that will just vacate it in the courts in a one-person decision, or we'll just ignore it altogether and see if the police do anything, and we'll just march on the city hall.
Right. Well, I don't understand that. That's what's going on in San Francisco and all of our liberal areas, but the people of the 7th District don't want it. And so Spanberger is running on that, and she knows the people don't want it, so she won't mention it. And then on health care, she was all in on health care from day one on ending Medicare as you know it, and in principle being for universal health care, et cetera.
Medicare for all.
Until she found out the price tag. The paper wrote a good editorial, $32 trillion, and you got to double the personal income tax rate and the corporate rate to pay for it. Double. That's not a typo.
Right.
Double your tax rates to pay for just the add-on to socialized health care. And it's already failed, right? You keep your doctor, you can keep your insurance. It's going to be affordable. All of it has proven to be just a nightmare for all of my constituents. And now they want to double down and make it all government run. And so you look around the world, I don't think you want to go that route.
Well, and what worries me is we see these protests about ICE agents. We see these protests about law enforcement.
Right.
Well, that's going to fall on the hospitals. If we do socialized medicine, as soon as people stop getting the preferential treatment they want at the hospitals, now we're going to have protest marches at our hospitals. That's where I worry that this is tracking to.
Yeah, right. And just look at the key aspect with hospitals. Obamacare supposedly was going to be so good and cheap and free that the ER, the emergency room usage, would go to zero. It didn't. It didn't go down. In fact, it's gone up. And so that was the great promise, that ER and the high-cost medicine would go away. It hasn't gone away. I've had constituents come in. I did town halls all over all 10 counties over August with any constituent that wanted to sign up. I met with them. And I had Democrats, Independents, Republicans come in. Democrats and Independents came in and said, I've got one insurance company. I've got one prescription. I have to buy that drug at whatever cost they give me. My doctor's not in on it. And I had to explain to them, that's Obamacare. I said, I want competition, right? Free market, people. And then a lot of people have been, miseducated about free markets. In free markets, a lot of competition lowers profits.
And it raises wages.
Right, and it's all linked too, right? And so the immigration issue we were just talking also lowers, if you open up the borders, wages have been flat for 30 to 40 years. They're finally growing, right? The GDP's going through the roof. Walmart retail sales through the roof. 100 million Walmart shopper sales through the roof. Reported 2 weeks ago. That's kitchen table. My opponent says you shouldn't look at the great economic growth. It's not kitchen table. If 100 million Walmart retail shoppers isn't kitchen table, I don't know what is, right? It's unbelievable, right?
That's not. Well, let me ask you about that, because I've heard this rhetoric, and this frightens me because they can twist anything around now, it seems.
Yeah.
They're now saying, well, yeah, everybody's working, but they're not making as much money as the CEOs are. And this class warfare, I think, is just designed to get them office, and they're going to abandon these folks anyway, but they're ginning up this crowd that almost... It reminds me of what I remember reading in my history books about 18th century France.
Right. Well, if you look at where folks are coming from, they're all Catholic, children of God, right? The mainstream press will never quote me on that part. But Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, socialist experiments. So all the socialist countries are moving to free market capitalist countries. Yeah. All of the socialist states are failing. California, et cetera, Illinois, New York, you go across. All of the socialist states are moving to free market states, And then all the socialized big government counties, people are leaving them to come to pro-business counties. And so the evidence is in, but then the ultimate irony is the folks that have left the blue states come to states like Virginia and start voting blue policy, which they just left. So that we're trying to get folks to realize, right? It's about your kids as well, right? We're spending, we have $1 trillion deficits every year now. Your kids are going to have to pay the bill, right? There's no free lunch.
Well, I asked Bob Goodlatte about this earlier in the show. I said, doesn't it seem like there's two separate countries going on? There's the country that the press is all reporting on, the tweets and the Bob Woodward, and I see more people in garages whispering to Bob Woodward again. That's great. And then the 4.2% GDP, the lowest unemployment in several sectors in history, and families spending more, economic activity is up. Why are there two countries, it seems like?
Well, the mainstream press is just at it, right? They discovered a key term you've probably heard of. They discovered a term called the deficit when we did tax cuts. First time I've ever heard them mention it in a decade. So we do tax cuts, cost $150 billion. If you grow at 3 or 4%, they're paid for, by the way. Then at the end of the year, the Democrats, we needed 9 Senate Democrat votes to get a budget. So we had to plus up the budget $400 billion.
Oh my God.
Not 150. So you got 150 paid plus. For to get 9 Senate Democrats. We had to plus up the budget $400 billion, not paid for. You haven't heard a word about the deficit since
that
on the budget, right? So that the mainstream media, for some reason, is just over-identified with a Democrat, and it's not even Democrat, right? JFK, John F. Kennedy, wouldn't know what he's looking at. He did supply tax cuts. He was proud of the Catholic faith. He was proud of USA, national sovereignty. Borders would not have been an issue. And strong military, right? Free markets, pro-business. And so that's the Democrat Party. And now you can see how far the left has departed, because that's a pretty good marker. When Dave Brat and JFK are on board the same ship, it's okay, right?
Who's party? So let me ask you, I know that we're now past Labor Day, and it's the crunch time in the race.
Yeah.
You're the only interview this morning of anyone who's actually running for re-election. So talk about the race. There was a big story out of this Muslim school. I guess even Chuck Schumer called it a madrasa. When Chuck Schumer in 2005 called something a madrasa, and Abigail Spanberger was a teacher there?
Yeah. And so we're waiting for the story. So in the first place, some of Spanberger's private information was let out, right? Social Security, medical stuff. That stuff should not be out in public.
Oh my God.
Everyone's on the same board there.
Did somebody in the school leak it, or?
No, it was the U.S. Postal Service made an error in sending out information, as far as I know yet. But that story's still developing. But the voters do need to know that that was not on her bio, this teaching stint. And so that school, it turns out, it has horrendous, right? They trained in terrorists that went to Al-Qaeda. They are anti-women, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-American. And the most problematic part is last week Spanberger went to the New York Times and said, "I'm proud of everything I ever did."
Oh, boy.
And so in retrospect, after she knows, this school was called Terror High for a reason. And as you said,
and it's funded by the Saudi royal family,
from what I understand. And so I don't understand that. If you're proud of it, why wasn't it on your biography? And then can you imagine if a Republican taught at a school, if a Republican taught at a school was anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-women, anti-American, it's game over. It's disqualifying.
Yeah. Even if you taught at a school named Robert E. Lee High School, you'd be in trouble.
It's just the double standard is amazing.
Well, and it's a dangerous time because these are the people who say, oh, they're using our freedoms against us. We talk about this. I actually talked about this with Mark Warner earlier. They use our freedoms against us and laugh. And we watch it in the Senate subcommittee or the Senate committee hearings with Kavanaugh.
Right.
It's all of our liberties, all of our freedoms are being weaponized against us, Dave. How do we fight that without losing who we are?
At the ballot box, the average American, I think, still has the right values. And so my last town hall, the left showed up, Team Spanberger, They booed the pastor while he gave the prayer. They lobbing swear words and F-bombs. It's on tape. It was reported by the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Chesterfield Observer. And then we couldn't speak for 90 minutes. It's all on tape. And Spanberger, it turns out, was in the front row. And so she says she wants to bring a new tone to D.C., but is that the tone?
Well, we see it in the Senate.
Yeah, right, and now you're seeing the same thing. So this is not an isolated event. It's their strategy for the election. They want to impeach the president. And that's they don't have an agenda, right? We just talked about health care, no agenda, open borders, get rid of our tax cuts, get rid of the economic growth.
But I almost wonder if they want property rights at all. It seems like they want to just open all the borders, except for the ones around their communities, of course. But it seems like private property is at great risk right now.
Yeah, well, that's the original definition of socialism, is ownership of the means of production. And some of the socialist candidates on the left, they're there already. They're saying, they're questioning. And it got pretty serious when Senator Elizabeth Warren, who endorsed my opponent, made the case for controlling business, right? Yeah. She said there's a case to be made that we need oversight of all businesses. That's not government oversight, right? That's going into your books, your private firm, your family firm, et cetera. Boy, that's what I mean. The people have to finally decide this country is being radically changed by this hard left element. And the people have to show up at the polls to change this.
Dave, God bless.
Thank you, Joe. God bless you. Thank you, man.
We'll talk to you again soon before the election.
You bet. Thank you.
Until next week, for all of us at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.